Picture this. You're walking through the streets of ancient Rome in the year 67 AD, and you witness something that makes your blood run cold. The emperor himself, Nero, is strolling through the forum with what appears to be his new wife, a stunning young woman draped in silken jewels. But whispers follow in their wake because everyone knows the horrifying truth. That woman beside the most powerful man in the world was once a boy named Sporus. And what Nero did to him represents one of the most disturbing acts of psychological and physical abuse in recorded history. Before we dive into this forgotten story of survival and suffering, if you're fascinated by the hidden truths of history, please hit that like button, subscribe to Emperor Secrets, and turn on notifications so you never miss a video. Share this story with friends who love diving deep into the past, and comment below to let me know where you're watching from. It's incredible that we're exploring these ancient tales together, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity. Your support means the world to Emperor Secrets, and it helps us keep bringing you stories that history tried to forget. Let's keep the conversation alive, motivate each other to uncover the truths of the past. What you're about to hear isn't just another tale of Roman excess. It's the story of how absolute power can transform love into obsession, grief into madness, and a human being into a living doll created to serve one man's twisted fantasy. The name Sporus might not be familiar to you, but his story will haunt you long after you finish listening. So, let's journey back to ancient Rome and uncover the chilling truth behind one of history's most disturbing tales. Nero wasn't born evil. In fact, his early reign showed remarkable promise. When he ascended to the throne at just 16 years old in 54 AD, many Romans believed they were witnessing the dawn of a golden age. He reduced taxes, funded lavish public entertainment, and even performed in theatrical productions that delighted the common people. His charisma and youthful energy captivated the empire. But absolute power has a way of corrupting even the most promising souls. By 65 AD, something had fundamentally broken inside the emperor's mind. Was it the paranoia that came with knowing everyone around him coveted his position? The isolation of being the only person in an empire of 60 million who could never be contradicted? Or was it the loss of the one person he claimed to love more than life itself? That person was Poppaea Sabina, a woman who was everything Nero thought he wanted, beautiful beyond description, intelligent enough to match his grandiose vision of himself, and ambitious enough to share his dreams of eternal glory. Unlike his first wife, Octavia, whom he married for political reasons in a cold, loveless union, Poppaea was vibrant, commanding, and unafraid to stand out. Where Octavia was reserved, Poppaea reveled in being the center of attention. Their affair began as a typical Roman scandal, but it quickly spiraled into something far more dangerous: obsession. Nero wasn't just attracted to Poppaea's beauty, he was consumed by her. Ancient historians like Tacitus and Suetonius describe his behavior as increasingly erratic and possessive. He flew into murderous rages if other men so much as looked at her too long during public functions. He stationed guards around her at all times, claiming it was for her protection but really to monitor her every move. He lavished her with gifts that bankrupted the imperial treasury: jewels from India, silks from China, perfumes from Arabia. But even these weren't enough. Nero began to reshape reality itself to accommodate his obsession. He divorced Octavia, a shocking move that alienated many of his supporters, and married Poppaea in a lavish imperial ceremony in 62 AD. The wedding was a spectacle of unprecedented luxury, with Nero sparing no expense to demonstrate his devotion. Yet, even marriage couldn't satisfy his need to possess her completely. He isolated her from family and friends, surrounded her with loyalists who owed their positions to him, and commissioned countless portraits and sculptures of her for his private chambers. Nero would spend hours watching her, not out of romantic devotion, but as if she were a beautiful object that existed solely for his pleasure. Poppaea, for her part, was no passive figure. She was intelligent and shrewd, using her influence to advance her family's interests and build a network of supporters to protect her if Nero's affections ever waned. But she had one fatal flaw: she wasn't afraid to challenge him. Unlike the rest of the imperial court, who had learned to anticipate Nero's moods, Poppaea retained her independence. She argued with him about policy, criticized his artistic pursuits, and even mocked his theatrical performances when she thought they were subpar. The details of what happened on that fateful day in 65 AD vary depending on the source, but the outcome is undisputed. During what began as a typical domestic argument, some say about Nero's late nights at chariot races, others about his theatrical obsessions, Nero lost control in a way that would haunt him forever. Poppaea, pregnant with their second child, dared to criticize his priorities, suggesting he cared more about his public image than his responsibilities as a husband and father. In a fit of rage, Nero struck her with brutal force. Some sources claim it was a single blow to her abdomen. Others describe a sustained attack that left her bleeding and unconscious on the marble floor. Imagine the moment when Nero realized what he had done. The man who commanded 30 legions, who could have anyone executed with a word, who was worshipped as a god in the eastern provinces, had just destroyed the one thing he truly cared about. Ancient sources describe a scene of unparalleled pathos. Nero threw himself on Poppaea's body, begging her forgiveness and commanding her to live as if his imperial authority could defy death itself. He summoned Rome's best physicians, offering them fortunes to save her and threatening torture if they failed. But it was too late. Poppaea died within hours, taking their unborn child with her. In that moment, something fundamental broke inside Nero's mind. His grief wasn't just emotional devastation. It was a complete break with reality. He refused to have Poppaea's body burned, as was Roman custom, instead having it embalmed and placed in a tomb more elaborate than those of previous emperors. He declared her divine, established a cult in her honor, and spent days talking to her corpse as if she could still hear him. The imperial court was forced to participate in this fiction, referring to Poppaea in the present tense and leaving her favorite seat empty at banquets. Anyone who suggested Nero move on risked exile or death. It was during this period of madness that Sporus entered Nero's line of sight, setting the stage for one of the most disturbing acts in recorded history. Sporus was likely 14 or 15, born into slavery in the imperial household and freed as a child. Raised within the palace walls, he received an education that prepared him for administrative duties, a position of relative privilege for a freedman. But this privilege came with absolute dependence on imperial favor. Freedmen could be elevated to great influence, but also discarded or killed on a whim with no legal recourse. What made Sporus special in Nero's eyes wasn't his intelligence or skills. It was his face. Multiple ancient sources, including Suetonius and Dio Cassius, note that Sporus bore an uncanny resemblance to Poppaea, particularly around the eyes and delicate bone structure. In a world where Romans believed physical resemblance indicated a deeper spiritual connection, this similarity would have seemed almost supernatural. The first time Nero saw Sporus after Poppaea's death, something clicked in his broken mind. Here was a chance to undo the irreversible, to bring back what he had destroyed. But there was one obvious problem. Sporus was male. For a man who had convinced himself he was a god, who had spent months talking to a corpse, changing someone's gender seemed like a minor obstacle. What followed was one of the most calculated acts of cruelty in human history. Nero didn't just decide to dress Sporus as a woman. He decided to make the transformation permanent. He summoned Rome's best physicians and ordered them to perform a surgical procedure to make Sporus appear more feminine. This wasn't just mutilation. It was the systematic destruction of Sporus' identity as a human being. The procedure, likely a form of castration or more invasive surgery, was dangerous, painful, and irreversible, often resulting in death from infection or blood loss. Even if Sporus survived, he would be forever changed physically, emotionally, and socially. He would never father children, never experience normal relationships, and never be considered fully male by Roman society. The surgery took place in the imperial palace, in quarters specially prepared for the purpose. Ancient surgical procedures were primitive, relying on basic instruments and crude anesthetics. Sporus would have been held down by guards while physicians approached with their tools, his screams falling on deaf ears. The process would have been excruciating, lasting hours with significant risk of death. Yet, this was only the beginning of his ordeal. Once Sporus recovered, a process that likely took weeks or months, Nero announced his intention to marry him in a full imperial wedding ceremony. Sporus was given a new name, Sabina, after the dead empress, and moved to special quarters where he could be prepared for his new role. Imperial seamstresses created an entire wardrobe of gowns designed to flatter his modified physique and hide any remaining masculine characteristics. Master jewelers crafted ornaments incorporating gems that had once belonged to Poppaea herself. Tangible links to the woman Sporus was being forced to replace. Makeup artists taught him cosmetic techniques to feminize his features, how to use kohl to make his eyes appear larger, rouge for rosy cheeks, and powders to soften facial angles. Hairdressers instructed him in elaborate styling techniques fashionable among aristocratic Roman women, using heated metal tools and expensive ornaments. These lessons weren't just about appearance. They were exercises in the systematic erasure of his original identity. Perhaps most psychologically damaging were the lessons in feminine behavior. Tutors taught Sporus how to walk, sit, and gesture in ladylike ways, how to hold his hands, position his feet, and arrange his clothing when seated. Voice coaches worked to modify his speech patterns, teaching him to speak in higher tones and adopt linguistic mannerisms associated with feminine discourse. This was a challenging aspect, as vocal patterns are deeply ingrained and difficult to change consciously. Can you imagine the psychological torture of this transformation? Every day, Sporus was forced to look in mirrors reflecting back a stranger wearing his face. Every lesson in feminine behavior reminded him that his identity was being erased. Every piece of jewelry that had once adorned Poppaea was a shackle binding him to a role he never chose. The wedding was scheduled for spring 67 AD, timed to coincide with religious festivals to add ceremonial weight. Nero spared no expense, treating it as a legitimate imperial wedding worthy of Rome's greatest emperor. The ceremony took place in the largest palace hall, decorated with imported flowers and illuminated by thousands of oil lamps. Musicians played traditional wedding songs, and servants offered the finest wines and delicacies. To outside observers unaware of the full story, it might have looked like a normal imperial wedding. But those in the know understood they were witnessing something unprecedented and disturbing. The most powerful man in the world publicly marrying a surgically modified teenage boy dressed as his dead wife. The ceremony included all traditional Roman rituals, exchanging vows, joining hands, sharing sacred bread, and signing legal documents to make the union official. Guests played their parts with practiced acting skills, offering congratulations and expensive gifts while maintaining an air of joy. But the atmosphere must have been thick with horror, fascination, and the nervous energy of participating in something fundamentally wrong. Following the wedding, Nero treated Sporus as a legitimate empress. He received his own household staff, quarters within the palace complex, and income from the imperial treasury. He had his own litter for traveling, horses for riding, and a retinue of supporters. But all this apparent luxury came at a terrible price: the complete erasure of his original identity and the constant performance of a psychologically devastating role. Sporus was expected to accompany Nero to public functions, sit beside him at state dinners, and play the devoted wife in all interactions. Nero genuinely seemed to believe he had resurrected Poppaea, calling Sporus by her name, reminiscing about shared memories that never happened, and expecting responses that maintained the fiction. For Sporus, every day was a high-stakes performance where the slightest mistake could mean death. He had to remember not just how to look and act like a woman, but how to respond as if he were Poppaea herself, reacting to events from a marriage he never experienced. Ancient sources describe Sporus as becoming increasingly skilled at this deception, developing an almost supernatural ability to anticipate Nero's moods and respond appropriately. But they also note that he grew more withdrawn and melancholic as time passed. The psychological strain was unimaginable. Every morning, he woke in rooms decorated to remind him of a dead woman he'd never met. Every mirror reflected a stranger. Every conversation required pretending to be someone else. For over 2 years, Sporus lived this bizarre existence. His ordeal reached new heights when Nero decided to tour Greece in 67 AD, eager to compete in festivals where he believed his artistic talents would be appreciated. Sporus accompanied him, displayed to foreign dignitaries as the Empress of Rome. Imagine Greek aristocrats trying to make sense of their conqueror traveling with a teenage boy dressed as a woman, demanding everyone treat this fiction as reality. By 68 AD, Nero's excesses had pushed the Roman establishment too far. Rebellions broke out across the empire, led by governors tired of his erratic behavior and neglect of governance. The Praetorian Guard declared opposition to his rule, and the Senate condemned him as an enemy of the state. When Nero fled Rome with a small group of supporters, Sporus was among them. Even facing death, Nero couldn't leave behind his living reminder of Poppaea. They holed up in a villa outside Rome, waiting for rescue or capture. As enemies closed in, Nero alternated between grandiose escape plans and theatrical preparations for suicide. When word came that capture was imminent, he chose death over humiliation, committing suicide in June 68 AD. But Sporus' nightmare was far from over. As one of the most visible symbols of Nero's reign, Sporus became a political pawn, passed from one powerful man to another like valuable property. First claimed by Nymphidius Sabinus, then by Otho, and finally by Vitellius, each treated him much as Nero had, keeping him dressed as a woman and calling him by Poppaea's name. Under Vitellius, Sporus' ordeal reached its ultimate conclusion. The new emperor decided to use him for public entertainment in the Colosseum, specifically in a reenactment of mythological scenes involving violence and humiliation. Rather than submit to this final degradation, being sexually humiliated in front of thousands for their amusement, Sporus made the only choice that was truly his own in years. Sometime in 69 AD, probably by poison, he took his own life. He was likely no more than 20 years old. In death, Sporus finally escaped the grotesque theater that had consumed his life. His story became a cautionary tale about the dangers of absolute power and the human cost of imperial excess. But ancient historians like Suetonius and Dio Cassius seemed less interested in Sporus as a person than as a symbol of imperial decadence. What makes his story so haunting isn't just the abuse he endured, but how he was systematically stripped of identity and agency. From the moment Nero decided he resembled Poppaea, Sporus ceased to exist as an individual and became a canvas for the emperor's twisted fantasies. The fact that Sporus chose death over further humiliation suggests that somewhere beneath the layers of forced femininity and imperial conditioning, some spark of his original self survived. His suicide was both a tragedy and a final act of defiance, a refusal to be degraded further, even at the cost of his life. Perhaps most tragically, we know almost nothing about who Sporus was before his transformation. What were his hopes and dreams? What did he want to do with his life? All of that was erased when he became Nero's living doll, replaced by a performance so complete that his original identity disappeared entirely. The boy who was forced to become an empress, who endured years of psychological and physical abuse, who finally chose death over further degradation, his story deserves to be remembered, not just as a curiosity.